Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Andrew Murnane podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are back to a solo episode. It's been awesome having guests on. Actually makes it a lot easier having guests on because I don't have to talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes straight just to myself. I actually have people to bounce things off of. But anyway, this is a solo episode, so that's what I'm going to be doing this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have been enjoying the podcast, please toss me a follow. Subscribe if you're on YouTube. Toss it a like. Comment some things you want me to talk about in the future down below. But without further ado, let's get into it. So today, this episode is going to be about priorities, stress, and how having priorities can actually help with feelings of anxiety and worry quite a bit, like having ultimate priorities in your life, things that you prioritize above all else. And I will be getting into some of the things that have been helping me in this regard. So I was not planning on doing a podcast episode today, but this is something that I have been focusing on in my life for the past couple weeks, and it's helped a lot. So I did jot a few notes down to give me some semblance of an idea of the path of this episode. But bear with me if I do start talking in circles. I hope that the message resonates by the end, and hopefully you will derive some value from this and potentially be able to implement some of the things I talk about in your own life. So to begin, I'm just going to relate it to how it's been impacting my life, what I've been doing. So basically, this idea of priorities. So right now in my life, my two top priorities have been staying present. This is always something that I'm working on, but I've really been trying my best to like really, really prioritize it, like above all else, like above doing well at my job, doing well at things in life is staying present. And I'll get into why I feel like that's very important and how it's actually helped me with feelings of anxiety, stress, worry. The second is minimizing stress. That's my second priority. So, first one was staying present. Second is minimizing stress. They kind of go hand in hand to a degree. I'll get into some details about why minimizing stress is so important and how they're related and how it's been helping me. So yeah, I guess the reason I talk a lot about the present moment and how important it is, and above even just being important, it's the understanding that it is the only thing there ever is. Like these concepts of past and future don't actually exist. You know, the past, it happened, but when the past happened, it was the present. The future will happen. Things will happen in the future, but they will happen as the present. So these concepts of past and future, they don't actually exist outside of our mind. Past exists as memories, and it's typically, we think of them in ways that, we wish if the past was better than the present, we wish the past could come back. If it was worse than the present, then we regret the past. If we feel like the future will be better than the present, we look forward to it, we long for it. And if we fear that it will be worse than the present, we feel things like worry and anxiety. But typically, the past and the future, they're thought of in, I guess, negative lights, and they typically come up for people more so as, regret in the past and anxiety, fear, worry when lost in the future. And the thing is, they only exist inside of our mind. So they are both figments of our imagination. When both of them happen, when the past happened, it was the present moment. When the future happens, it is the present moment. So it's just incredibly important. The only place that your mind cannot exist in the present is in the present. And the only place you can exist as the observer of your mind, because you are not your mind, as we know. If you've listened to any of my content, you have heard me talk about this probably hundreds of times. But you, as the observer, cannot exist in the past and the future because the present moment is life. It is where life is happening always. So the only place you can ever exist, and it's where you always physically exist, but mentally, you and most people don't very often at all, almost, if ever. Some people almost never exist mentally in the present moment because as thoughts happen, thoughts can't happen about the present. They actually, if they're related to the present, they're labeling it based on something in the past or something, some future projection that you're worried about. So, first priority has been staying present, which means not thinking, doing my best to not live in my mind and live in the moment that's in front of me. Second is doing my best to reduce stress. And so, from my understanding, stress basically it comes down to being in one place and wanting to be in another. Whether that means that, if you have work stress, maybe you have a lot of things on your plate and you want to have all of them done, but you don't have all of them done right now. So you're in this place where not everything is done and you want everything to be done. The issue is that you get stressed because you want everything to be done, but you can only ever do one thing at a time. You can only ever do things in the present moment. They can't just be done magically. Like you have to get them done. But this idea of stress is not super beneficial in when it comes to actually getting them done. If you have a ton of tasks and you're getting stressed about all of them, take out a piece of paper, write them down one by one, do things in the present moment, like stay present in the task that you're doing and cross them off one by one. I promise if you have 10 things you have to do, you write them all down, prioritize them from most important to least important. And after you finish that first thing, or finish those first two things and you cross them off, you will immediately start feeling better. So this idea of stress, from my understanding, is that there are basically two types of stress. Do not quote me on any of this. I'm not a professional. I don't always 100% know what I'm talking about, but this is this is my understanding and it's made sense to me and why reducing stress is something that I'm prioritizing because I think it is so important. So from my understanding, there are two types of stress. There's external stress, like for example, what I just said about work, like if you have a lot of shit you have to do and you want to get it done but you haven't gotten it done yet and you're getting stressed out, or all these external things in our environment that are typically outside of our control, but we want to control them. We think we should be able to control them, and we get stressed because we usually can't control them. So that is external stress. And then there's internal stress. So this is things like not always quote unquote bad or viewed in a negative light. Unlike external stress, typically is something that you want to reduce as much as you can. Internal stress can be very good. Like, for example, if you work out and you're doing bicep curls, when you are working those out, you are tearing down the muscle fibers. That is an internal stress you are doing and putting on your body on purpose so that you consume nutrients, you consume calories, you consume protein, and it's able to build up those muscle fibers back up and they become bigger. So when you're working out, you're actually tearing your muscle fibers and putting a lot of stress on them so that they can build up and get bigger and stronger. So that is, you know, it's a good stress, I guess, is how I would label it. And then another form of internal stress would be, say, for example, you're starting to get sick. That's like an internal stress. So your body wants to fight off that sickness. It wants to make you feel better. But when it comes to this and how it relates to external stress is that from my understanding, you have these external stresses, internal stresses. Say an internal stress you're dealing with right now is a little bit of a virus. You have a little bit of a sickness and you have a lot of external stress going on in your life. From my understanding, your body has to prioritize that external stress and deal with that before it can, or at least focus more of its attention on that before it can focus more of its attention on that internal stress. So by having a lot of external stress in your life, a lot of things that you're getting worked up about, that you're worried about, you are basically not allowing your body to fight off certain illnesses, viruses, as well as it could if you didn't have any external stress. So say you have a lot of external stress, you have a virus come up, it may take a week and a half to 2 weeks to fight that thing off because you have so much external stress that it has to focus on. It doesn't have much energy, much time to focus on that internal stress. Whereas if you have very little external stress going on in your life, you're living in the present moment. You're not necessarily worrying about future potential scenarios, hypothetical situations. You're not feeling bad about something that happened in the past because that no longer exists. It's always right now. If you're able to stay in the present and you're able to reduce that stress, your body is able to fight off that internal stress, that internal virus, whatever it is, much easier because it doesn't have all of that external stress to deal with. So that's basically the reasoning behind. So you can see how they're tied together. Like by staying present, you are reducing the stress, the external stress. And then the reason it's so important to reduce the external stress is because your body is better able to function. You will be healthier to a degree, to a large degree. So those are basically the reasons that these are my priorities. So next part I want to get into is how I came to these priorities. And it's something if you've seen, my TikToks, Instagrams, any of my other content, you know that I post sometimes these scenarios. And it's basically part of my morning meditation routine where I do this almost every morning and have been doing it for years, where I close my eyes and essentially imagine that I'm 100 years old or very old and close to death. And I spend a few minutes getting into this state. I have my eyes closed and I imagine sort of going through my life for a minute or so. I'm 26 right now, 30, 35, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And so then I feel like I'm old and wrinkly and kind of in that state. And then sometimes I'll have, like a great granddaughter walk in for whatever reason. Her name is always Sarah. She walks in, I'm in a hospital bed, and she asks me, Papa, what do you regret most about your life? And I think back as this 100-year-old Andrew Murnane and think about what I regret about my life. So when I used to do that a few years ago, for whatever reason, the thing that came up almost every single time was that I didn't create content. I have a lot of things I'm interested in. Obviously, I'm doing that now, but I have a lot of things I'm interested in. I've always been interested in these things for the last few years. And for whatever reason, the thing that kept coming up it was probably like a year or two before I actually started creating content. I knew that my future regret was going to be not creating more content. And the reason that I wasn't doing it was, a lot of things I talk about, like the fear of judgment, worrying about what people would think of me, worrying about whether I would fail or do a good job, or if people would like what I had to say, or, how much people would judge me when I put myself out there and basically, flipped my phone camera around and filmed myself talking. And so that was my future regret for a while. Obviously now I create a lot of content. That is no longer a future regret because I do it. But now when I go through that scenario, my future regret is not staying present. And as older, wiser, 100-year-old me, I come to the realization that the present moment truly is the only thing there ever is. And if you are unable to stay present throughout your life, you miss life. You miss it. Potentially, if you are never able to live in the present moment and stay present and get outside of your mind and your thoughts and just be where your feet are, be in the moment, be where your body is mentally, then you can potentially miss out on all of life. You can go your entire life and miss the whole thing. And so now when I get into that scenario, my future regret is not being present more often. And I'm fairly good now. I'm a fuck ton of a lot better than I was 5-10 years ago. That's for sure. I almost never I didn't even understand the concept of the present moment when I was in high school. I was so typically living in the future, just worried all the time, worrying about what people might think of me, worrying about how something might go. So Now I'm able to more so, but you can always be more present. And every time, you get into a negative thought pattern or, think back to something that happened and regret it or worry about something that may happen, you are not living in the present. And I've posted some videos about, how to stay present. There's some things you can keep in mind, like watching your breath or becoming aware of your breathing. Breathing is something that always happens in the present moment. So by becoming aware of your breath, you will automatically be present. By feeling your body is existing in the present moment, like being where your feet are, keeping that in mind, and then just realizing when you're not being present. When you come to the realization that you aren't present, you're present. When you realize and catch yourself going into this thought pattern, getting lost in your thoughts and your mind is racing, when you catch yourself and you're like, hold on, I'm going into this crazy thought pattern, my mind is racing, but you remember that you are not those thoughts. You are not your mind. You are simply the awareness behind it, simply the observer, the watcher of the world, the watcher of your thoughts, the watcher of your feelings, the one who can feel your emotions, the one who can feel your body, the one who can hear your thoughts. But you are not any of those things. You are simply the observing presence. And understanding that in itself can help a lot with keeping you present. Just understanding that that voice in your head is not your voice. You're simply the one that can hear it. So that is what got me to this point of realizing that I want to prioritize being present and reducing stress above all else. So the reason, and finally, after it's getting close to 17 minutes, I'm tying this back into what likely, I don't know what the title of this is going to be yet, but it'll likely have something to do with how staying present and reducing stress can help with anxiety or something like that. So, how this all ties back into the understanding of, or not understanding, I don't even know what word I'm trying to use, how this all ties back into helping you be able to manage feelings of anxiety. So, when it comes to certain situations, so now we've gotten out of the way that my priority in life, in any scenario, is staying present, reducing stress. Staying present is really the main thing that will help reduce stress. And I already talked about why it's so important to reduce stress, from my understanding. But so let's get into some situations here. So say I have a presentation coming up and for work or something, and I want to do well on it. And I'm kind of nervous about it because I want to do well, and I'm worrying about it. I'm very feeling very anxious about it, worrying about it, and I've already understood, the first thing you have to understand when it comes to feelings of anxiety, feelings of nervousness, is that it's okay to feel them. If you have a presentation coming up, you have a speech coming up, like it's super normal to feel nervous. That is not something you shouldn't try to get rid of that feeling, because the more you try to get rid of it, the stronger that feeling will become. And it will lead to, extreme feelings of nervousness and like almost paralyzation. So realizing that that feeling of nervousness isn't bad. It's not inherently bad. It's actually very okay to feel it, and it's super normal to feel nervous in situations like that. And once you understand and accept that feeling and understand that it's very much okay to feel it, you will actually allow that feeling to pass through you. And it's more so the resistance of it, the fighting of it, the trying to suppress that feeling that causes it to stick around and makes it feel so quote unquote bad. But by understanding that it's not inherently bad, it's very normal. And by understanding that, that feeling is actually very similar, feelings of anxiousness, nervousness are very similar to the feeling of excitement, potentially the same feeling. The only difference is the thoughts that you have about that feeling. So by understanding, as I already mentioned, that you are not your thoughts, you are the observer, the awareness behind those thoughts, you can simply observe those thoughts, observe that feeling, and allow it to be, accept that it is feeling that way. So when it comes to, I have a speech coming up or a presentation and I'm getting very nervous, I want to do well. How this ties back into these priorities is that I want to do well on it. My mind says I have to do super well on it. And, that's great. But that is not my priority. That is not my priority. When I went through that, 100-year-old me scenario, and I wanted to figure out what I regret most about my life, it was not staying more present, living in the moment. If I have a presentation coming up and I'm super nervous about it, worrying about what might happen, what potential scenarios could happen, am I going to do a good job? Am I not going to do a good job? Am I going to mess up? Am I going to stumble on my words? Am I going to totally forget what I'm saying? I'm worrying. I'm not being present in that moment. And then I remember my priority is not to do well on presentations. And this is the key. My priority is not to do well on presentations. It's not to do well in my job. It's not to make a shitload of money. It's not to, you know, be the happiest person in the world. My priority is to stay present above all else, above doing well on that presentation. So I start getting nervous and then I'm like, hold on. My priority is to stay present. I know I've been through that scenario. I've been, 100 years old in my mind. I know that I would rather at the end of my life have stayed present than have done well on this presentation. So I'm going to choose to stay present. And it's easier said than done. I know that. It's not just, I choose to stay present, but it's realizing that you have already decided on your priority. And you may have other priorities, but this I think is a very important one to most people. It's been my priority for the last, it's been my priority for a while, but really, really focused on it the last couple of weeks. And by understanding that this is your priority, it can allow you to step outside those like thought patterns that you keep having and that state of nervousness and worry about an upcoming situation. And it can be anything. I had some other situations written down here. It can be a presentation, some sort of social interaction, being the guest on a podcast, any of those things. You have a party coming up and it's been fucking COVID for a year and a half. You haven't seen that many people in a while. You're worried about, you're having social anxiety. You're worried about, how you're going to be able to converse with people. Like, are you even going to be able to converse normally? Like, what do you even say? Like, what are people going to think of you? Well, first of all, no one's thinking about you very much. They're all thinking the same thing walking into that party. They're like, oh, I wonder what everyone's going to think of me. Everyone's thinking that. So it's kind of funny. It's like the ultimate paradox. Everyone's worried about what everyone thinks of them while simultaneously thinking and worrying about what everyone thinks of them and only worrying about themselves. So no one's actually thinking about anyone else. So understanding that can help a lot with social anxiety. But by understanding that your priority is staying present. If this is your priority, I'm guessing a lot of people in their life, they want to be more present in the moment, reduce it. It kind of naturally reduces anxiety. The more often you can be present, it will sort of naturally reduce feelings of worry and fear and anxiety. So by deciding that your priority is to stay present and understanding that staying present will help reduce stress, another priority could be reducing stress. By understanding how important it is to do that in your health, in your ability to, fight sickness, your lifespan, people who live high stress lives versus low stress lives. Low stress lives typically live much longer, healthier lives. So by understanding that your priority is to stay present or something along those lines, even when you start to get nervous about certain things, you know that you would rather stay present than do well in that social interaction. You would rather stay present than do well on that presentation. You would rather stay present than do well as a guest on that podcast. In that moment leading up to it, you would rather stay present. And the funniest part is by staying present, you will likely roll into that situation staying present. And if you're giving a presentation and you're able to stay present throughout that presentation, not worrying about, because typically people, they get nervous about a presentation. It's not the presentation itself. They're not worried about speaking. They're worried about how people will react to their speech. They're not. So even while they're doing it, they're not staying present because they're worried about how people are reacting to their speech, how they're going to judge them if they mess up. That's not staying present. So by staying present leading up to it, it will help you once you get into that situation to stay present throughout that. And you don't need, you can prepare, for sure, prepare. Like if you're giving a presentation, obviously prepare, but there's a very, very distinct difference between actively preparing and passively worrying. Preparing is practicing, like going through it. Typically, you're given a speech, you probably practice a bunch of times. And the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll get. Usually that in itself will help, reduce some of the nerves. But by staying present while practicing, not worrying simultaneously as you're practicing about, how it's going to go, by prioritizing, staying present, it will help when it comes to those worries, because you will remember my priority is to stay present. It's so important. It's so beneficial to me. It's more beneficial than any outcome, any positive outcome of this speech, of this guest appearance on a podcast, of this social interaction. Staying present is the ultimate priority for me, at least. Again, this is my, personal experience. It's my podcast. So, talking about myself, because that is the only experience that I understand. But yeah, so those situations, your mind, and I'll probably wrap it up pretty soon here, but your mind, it struggles. It thinks that you need to do super well in that presentation. You need to, do really well in that social interaction, or else people aren't going to like you. It's like, no, you don't even know how that, you can't predict the future is the other thing. You don't know how that social interaction is going to go. It could go super well, just as easily as it could, not go super well. But at the same time, like, all those people that you're interacting with are worrying about themselves too. So they're not really thinking about you very much. And by staying present in that interaction, you will likely have a much better experience of that interaction. So by taking some time to decide on your priorities, for example, staying present, reducing stress. I've already talked about the benefits of them. This is something that I have been focused on in my life recently. So I wanted to share. This episode was a bit off the cuff. I mean, most of my episodes kind of are. I do have a couple notes that I kept here, but that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. So hopefully this made some sense. Hopefully you derived some value from this. Uh, I think I forgot to mention at the start of this episode, but I am in New York right now. This is my Airbnb behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, it's a nice little studio in the West Village. I'm here for the week and bouncing around, visiting some friends and family in New York and New Jersey. So super excited to be here. I've missed New York a lot, as it has been 8 months since I've been here. I've lived here for the last couple years. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you derived some value from it. If you did enjoy it, please toss it a like, toss me a follow, subscribe if you're on YouTube, comment some more things you want me to talk about, and let me know if you implement some of this into your life, and hopefully it helps. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and I will talk to you later. Peace.